Welcome back to Transfer Talk. In today's returning episode, we're going to be talking about Sebastian Vettel and his future at Ferrari. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that ever since Vettel joined Ferrari back in 2015, a few years ago now, he's always been the undisputed number one driver, their main man, their main guy they wanted to win the title. But in 2019, as we all know, that has kind of changed a little bit with Charles Leclerc moving up to the big daddy team Ferrari from Alfa Romeo and instantly in his first season beating Vettel in the points at the end of the year. Partner that with the fact that Leclerc had the most pole positions of any driver in 2019 and had 2 victories to Vettel's 1 in 2019. Leclerc is a much younger driver and arguably has a much higher ceiling, with his potential only getting better, whereas you would argue Vettel, perhaps his ability will decline now he's becoming one of the older drivers on the grid. So it makes sense from a Ferrari standpoint to put all their eggs in Leclerc's basket and maybe start to think about moving Vettel on. Now, will Vettel move on? This is a really sticky question, and I think there's a couple of key variables that will influence this decision. I think the first one is, what do Ferrari want to do when planning their driver lineup? It's no secret that pretty much since their first ever race in the first ever season of Formula 1, they've always had a number 1 and a clear number 2 driver. Iconic duos include, especially more recently, Schumacher-Barrichello, Raikkonen-Massa, Alonso-Massa, poor Felipe Massa, Vettel-Raikkonen. You kind of get the picture there. And in 2019, with new management with Mattia Binotto, they brought in Leclerc and put him against Sebastian Vettel, 2 drivers fighting to be number 1, and it didn't quite work out as planned. I'm sure the team would have hoped that with a completely new change of strategy, they could really take the fight to Mercedes, but ultimately, incidents and mistakes from their individual drivers and their own team management and especially race strategy cost them any kind of chance at any sort of title, despite the fact for a good chunk of the season, they had the best car on the grid. So, will they want to change for 2021, 2022, whatever? Will they move on of Sebastian Vettel and replace him with a driver that would fit that number 2 driver mould a little bit better? But then I think the other factor in this decision is Sebastian himself. He is certainly aware that if he leaves Ferrari, it is unlikely that there's going to be another top team willing to take him on. So if he is willing to play that number 2 supportive role to Leclerc, I don't see why Ferrari would want to get rid of him. He's certainly a driver, as we saw in 2019, whilst he made plenty of mistakes, was a driver who can still win Grand Prix. He can still put it on pole position, and whilst Leclerc beat him at the end of the season, it wasn't a million miles away, and I think one bad season shouldn't suggest the driver's career is completely over. That being said, the juicy bit of today's video, if he does leave, who should replace him? And I've kind of structured this video with a few different tactics Ferrari could go down, a few different alleys, starting with the experienced route. Starting with a driver who is going to jump into that seat, who is going to be quick, is going to win races, but also has a little bit more experience, which at the moment Charles Leclerc is lacking. We shouldn't forget he's only in his second year of Formula 1. And I think the most sensible place to start is Daniel Ricciardo. A 7-time race winner, is currently finding himself fighting in the midfield, which in my opinion is criminal. I still believe this is a driver who has the ability to win World Championship, has the ability to jump into any team and not cause too many upsets and fireworks that we have seen from other drivers in the past. And yes, I think Ricciardo would be aware this would perhaps be his final chance to embed himself within a team and also go on to win a title. At the moment, I'm not really seeing that from Renault, at least the signs they have shown over the last couple of years. So if Ricciardo goes to Ferrari, yes, you're going to have a situation where there isn't a number 1 and a number 2. Ricciardo is going to go into that team wanting to be that team lead, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Ricciardo is a driver that we saw with Max Verstappen. Even though they had on-track incidents, their relationship off track still remained one of the best bromances in Formula 1. And if Ricciardo can go to Ferrari and do that with Leclerc, that could be the exact kind of thing they're looking for, not only to help Ricciardo potentially win a championship, but also help Leclerc learn a little bit more and develop his own abilities. But that's if they want Ricciardo to be that number one. If they want a number one and number two, this isn't going to be a good option. If they want Leclerc to be their talisman, maybe Ricciardo's not the best option. Never mind the fact that he's only just gone to Renault. He may want to still pursue a potential title hunt with them when the big regulation change comes around in 2022, and also there's going to be quite a heavy fee to get him out of that contract. And with that in mind, maybe a driver like Valtteri Bottas would be a better option. Now hear me out. I understand Bottas, if he moved to Ferrari, wouldn't be a driver I think they would expect to jump in that car and instantly win titles. But what you're getting from Bottas is very, very different to Ricciardo. Again, he's a driver who isn't going to cause too many arguments behind the scenes, and is a driver who is very ready to jump in, get the job done, who's going to win Grand Prix, who more often than not is going to be there to be a good backup driver, who we've seen at Mercedes is more than happy to get out the way for the benefit of the team, and that's something I feel Ferrari are lacking a little bit with their current driver lineup. The biggest issue with Bottas is going to be getting him out of Mercedes. However, I actually think that's not going to be as big an issue as it currently seems. You see, Mercedes themselves are in a little bit of a pickle at the moment because they've got Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, they're clear number one, the superstar of their team, but they've also got the likes of Ocon and Russell coming through, who you could argue are very, very close to deserving a chance at that top team, especially George Russell. So Bottas is kind of a placeholder for the time being, and he will be aware that Mercedes, ever since Bottas joined in 2017, have only given him a 1-year contract extension. For him and for Mercedes, it could be a really good opportunity to give Bottas to another top team, get a nice chunky fee for it, have a space for the likes of Ocon or Russell, but Bottas is still going to a top team where he can still fight for titles. It's just whether Mercedes would be happy him going to a big rival like Ferrari. But from a Ferrari point of view, a driver who is consistent, not necessarily an A-star tier, but someone who can win, can get pole positions, can mix it up with the best in Formula 1 on his day, that seems like a good option to me. Other drivers who potentially could fit the bill of an experienced driver, Carlos Sainz. Again, a little bit like Ricciardo, questions on whether Sainz would want to leave his current position. Like Ricciardo, Sainz is that team leader at McLaren, and McLaren are a team that is very plausible could jump right to the top with those 2022 regulations. McLaren themselves are in a bit of a renaissance. Big bounce back in 2019. A podium for Sainz in Brazil. Don't forget next season they're partnering with Mercedes. He is their main man. Does he really want to leave at the moment? It would be a gamble for sure, but if Norris potentially is getting better, and if Norris overtakes Sainz at the end of 2020, it might be worth moving to a Ferrari, a team which you would be pretty confident are going to build a strong car for the new regulations, and embed yourself within that team alongside Leclerc. Again, I think this is an option Ferrari would explore, but it's one I think from a driver point of view, from Sainz's viewpoint, I'm not too sure he'd be too keen on at this point in time, especially with 2022 around the corner. How about, now this is a bit of a rogue one, Danny Kabir. Now, hear me out once again, hear me out. Yes, we know the torpedo has his issues. He's not the cleanest driver on the grid. But then he has been in Formula 1 since 2014, drove for Red Bull, beat Daniel Ricciardo in his full season at Red Bull, but we also know he did get dropped from Red Bull back to Toro Rosso, and in 2018 had to sit the season out because he was surplus to requirements for Red Bull. He came back in 2019, and for the first half of the season, for me, was one of the most underrated drivers in that midfield, scoring his third podium of his career in Germany. But when Gastly came back to the team, I feel Gastly had the edge. So what's in it for Ferrari? Why would they pick a driver like Kabir? Well, in that year that Kabir was out of Formula 1, he was with Ferrari. He was their test driver, so if anything happened to Vettel or Raikkonen for whatever reason, it would have been Danny in that car, most likely, which is a fun little fact. So there's a relationship already there, and also a driver like Kabir, again, I don't think would be a driver who's going to really challenge Leclerc for that number one status, and also he's going to come at a massively reduced cost. This is something that Red Bull, it could be quite handy for them to get Kabir off their books. Whilst he's a solid driver for their Toro Rosso team, realistically, he's not going to get another chance at Red Bull. So for Danny, a move to a top team like Ferrari is an absolute goldmine, so he's going to be on board. It's just whether Red Bull would want him to move to a big rival like Ferrari, and it's whether Ferrari would be willing to take a big risk on Danny Kabir. And actually, there's a risky category we'll talk about a little bit later on, but I think he's earned his spot in the experienced place. I don't know. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. But moving on to the next tactic, it's keeping the seat within the Ferrari family. Now, surprisingly enough, out of all the top teams, the Ferrari Junior Academy is perhaps one of the best in terms of drivers ready to take the step up to Formula 1. They've got 5 young drivers in Formula 2 this season, and with the likes of Schumacher, Eilert and arguably Robert Schwartzman, I could see any of those 3 moving up at least into Formula 1 over the next couple of seasons. The big question there though is it sensible to go straight into a Ferrari? I don't really think so. So, for argument's sake, if one of them can get into an Alfa Romeo over the next couple of years, and then Vettel leaves, a Schwartzman, a Schumacher could be a sensible option. But we're thinking a little bit more closer to the current season. I think it's a little bit far away for those guys in Formula 2. If one of them can win the title convincingly like Leclerc did, it might be worth the gamble. But again, that's going to be a very inexperienced lineup. Leclerc with only 3 or 4 seasons under his belt, and a rookie, I think that's a little bit too inexperienced for a team like Ferrari. So how about Giovinazzi? He's already completed 1 full season, and it was a little bit topsy-turvy. That first half of the year wasn't fantastic. Raikkonen was definitely the better of the two, and as we saw at Ferrari, Vettel definitely had the edge over Raikkonen. So that wouldn't be the most sensible risk in my opinion. But we saw in the second half of the year last year, Giovinazzi was definitely improving and was beating Raikkonen more often than not. So there's potential, but for me, if they really want to consider him as a viable option, he's going to have another big step up in 2020 to put him right in the shop window. And I think the fact that he's the most experienced driver in that Ferrari Junior Academy, the fact that he is an Italian driver, a factor I don't usually like to consider, but it's something a team like Ferrari, who haven't had an Italian driver since 2009, Giancarlo Fisichella, it might just tempt them that a little bit more, especially if he's showing signs of being a strong backup driver to Charles Leclerc. I don't know. Hey, maybe they'll bring back Kimi Raikkonen for a 3rd stint. Unlikely, but if they need someone very short term, he could be someone who they know a lot about, but I don't really think Raikkonen would be willing. We all know he went to Alfa Romeo to get away from the spotlight, so I don't think it's something Kimi would be too keen on. But how about world-class drivers? What about Max Verstappen? What about Lewis Hamilton? That's a huge risk if Ferrari wanted to do that. And yes, in an ideal world, you want your Formula 1 team to have the 2 best drivers on the grid. And there's no doubt in my mind, if either Verstappen or Hamilton partnered Charles Leclerc, that would be the best driver lineup on the grid, undoubtedly. But having 2 number 1 drivers in a team like Ferrari, that's a huge risk that it's not worked with Leclerc and Vettel. I don't think they're going to want to make that same mistake twice. Partner that with the fact it's going to be such ridiculous amounts of money to sign either Hamilton or Verstappen. Yes, Hamilton's going to be out of contract at the end of the season, but even then, he is not coming on a cheap fee. He is going to come with the biggest wage in Formula 1. Verstappen has a contract until 2023. I don't see it happening. Likewise, Hamilton and Verstappen are at two of the best teams in Formula 1 and clearly the number one driver. If they move team, they're going to want the same kind of promises. They're going to want to go to a team that they believe can win titles, but also they want to go to a team that's going to be built around them like they currently are. So whilst it would be awesome to see a Hamilton, a Verstappen or Leclerc all in the same team, unlikely for me at this point in time. So we've looked at experienced drivers, we looked at the Ferrari family, and we've looked at world-class drivers. But let's just imagine a world where Ferrari take a risk, take a gamble, take a driver a little bit left of field, maybe a diamond in the rough kind of thing I'm going for here. And again, just hear me out. I want to start off with Nico Hulkenberg. I still believe, thoroughly believe, he should be in Formula 1. He is good enough to be in those top 20 seats in the world. Is he Ferrari good enough? I think so. In 2018, he was one of my drivers of the season. He was best of the rest, behind the top 3 teams. 2019 wasn't so good. He had a lot of reliability issues, so did teammate Daniel Ricciardo, and when push came to shove, it was Ricciardo who came out on top. But Ferrari, at this moment in time, don't necessarily need a driver as good as Ricciardo. They need someone who's consistent, someone who they know isn't going to cause unnecessary crashes, someone who is going to be reliable for them, and I think Hulkenberg fits that quite well. Again, this is a little bit of a risk. He's a free agent for a reason, and there is even more reasons why Williams, Haas didn't pick him up in the summer or at the end of 2019, because he is quite an expensive driver to pay for. However, Ferrari are a team that are far more wealthier than midfield teams like Williams and Haas, and being a free agent, he is going to be much easier to pick up and bring to the team than a driver like Ricciardo, Bottas, Sainz would be. So financially, it's a sensible option. It's just whether they feel he is good enough to be that rear gunner, and it's just whether they feel his time in Formula 1 is over like Renault believed it to be. Other drivers that potentially would be in the gamble section. Sergio Perez. Now again, he's a driver who has a contract. He's a driver who's at a team, I would argue, on the up. Racing Point, as we know, next season are going to become Aston Martin. A really exciting venture, and Perez already has made himself the number one, the clear number one, the most convincing number one on the grid, in my opinion, at Racing Point. So why would he want to move on when so many positive things are happening? Well, we all know Ferrari and the history they have. This could be a once-in-a-career opportunity. He had an opportunity before to go to McLaren, and that didn't quite work out. Wasn't necessarily his fault, but like Hulkenberg, he's proved to be Mr. Consistent. He can drag a dog of a car to some ridiculous, not only points-paying positions, but podiums. This guy has far too many podiums when you actually look at the vehicles he scored those podiums in. So for Ferrari, he's a little bit Alonso-esque. He's going to drag the most out of that car, but he's going to be on the more aggressive side. He's going to be a driver who's going to play a bit of rough and tumble. And for a team like Ferrari, do they really want a driver like that alongside Leclerc? I'm not too sure, but certainly I think if he was in a Ferrari, he would do a solid job. Let's talk about another driver, certainly, who I don't think's proved himself yet in Formula 1. This would be a huge gamble, but it'd be an interesting one. Pierre Gastly. We all know his time at Red Bull didn't quite work out, and that's an understatement if I'm ever going to say one. But in that second half of last year, my goodness, did we see a brand new Gastly, a fired up Gastly, ready to take it on with the big boys, getting a second place finish in Brazil. And I think a team like Ferrari could potentially sweep him away. Yes, there's a big risk that he could perform like he did at the beginning of his time at Red Bull. He could crumble under the pressure, but I already think he's learned from that. I already think he has proved at Toro Rosso he can get the better of experienced drivers like Danny Kabir. He can mix it up with some of the big boys when he really needs to. And I think maybe moving away from the pressure cooker that is the Red Bull family, moving to Ferrari knowing he's going to be in a number 2 role, maybe that would change things up. Maybe he would relish that second chance, really knowing the fact this is now make or break. And a little bit like Kabir, I think would be a driver who would benefit just moving away from that slightly toxic environment. I don't know. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. I was going to mention a certain Fernando Alonso, but I think for today, for Ferrari, I don't really see it happening. But I know there will be people in the comments that would want me to mention his name. And also, while it pains me to say, I don't think Grosjean is the right pick. But what I did do yesterday was ask your thoughts on this topic over on the community page, and this was the data we were able to gather. 62% of you believe Ferrari should go with an experienced driver, someone who has scored a podium in Formula 1 and will jump into that seat, a ready-made driver, and can do the job. A Ricciardo, a Bottas, a Sainz or Kabir. It was then very close between taking someone from within the Ferrari family or taking a gamble. And very few of you believe it should be Hamilton or Verstappen, which I was slightly surprised at actually. I thought that would be slightly higher, even though I don't think they should. I thought public perception maybe would be slightly different, and only 1% believe it should be someone I have not mentioned in this video. Maybe that was just the Grosjean army backing me up there, but that is your thoughts. But after today's video, you can vote again in the top right hand corner on this video. So right now, in the top right hand corner, there should be a little I button. If you pause the video or just hover over the screen for a moment, there you can quickly click and have your say. But I think it will still remain pretty similar. And before we go, I'd love to know your exact feelings in the comments section below. But my answer, who do I think Ferrari should pick up if Vettel leaves? I think your two best options at the moment would be Valtteri Bottas and Nico Hulkenberg. Again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Transfer Talk, these slightly longer episodes, more debate style, they're back. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you are new around here and you're a little bit lost at the moment looking for content, feel free to subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you would like to know exactly when I've uploaded the video, you can feel free to follow me on Twitter or hit that notification bell. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you're all keeping safe, I hope you're all well, and I hope to see you in the next one.